Some of you may not care about West Virginia versus Texas, but I think a lot of you care about whether there's a hot seat situation and maybe a superstar head coach looking to work his way into the equation at Texas. There are two things that are not going anywhere this year. The Tom Herman hot seat talk is probably not going anywhere this year because I think most people who have him on the hot seat are not going to be convinced. After they lost against Oklahoma, I don't think a win over Oklahoma State is changing many people's opinion one way or the other. That's not going anywhere. And the smoke about Urban Meyer is not going anywhere. So I'm perusing the Horns 24/7 board today, and I saw a quote that I disagreed with. I didn't even write down the poster, so I'm sorry. But I was reading, and you tell me if you agree with this. It's an opinion deal. Yours is worth every bit as much as mine. But someone wrote on the board, you fire a head coach when players stop playing hard for that coach and their teammates. There is no quit on this team yet. So in other words, as long as the team hasn't quit on Tom Herman, there's no reason to fire him. Now, in general, I wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. You can have plenty of reason to move on from a guy whose team hasn't quit on him. I mean, you could be 0-10 and still play hard. There are a lot of bad teams out there that play hard. Texas probably not going 0-10 this year, but my point is, independent of Texas, just in general, I'm not a believer in that. That's how you get your wagon hitched to a long, long tenure of mediocrity. So now we zoom into the Texas situation. Do you remember when they lost to Oklahoma? I told you I thought that was a must-win game. I told you, in my humble opinion, changes would come eventually as a result of that loss. Not the next week, but they would come eventually. And then, do you remember I told you, I think it was last week, Colin, it was pretty recently, I sat on this very show, and I told you I'd had some discussions with some Texas buddies of mine, and I had presented my viewpoint, but I'm not a Texas insider. I'm not a Texas fan, so I don't have ownership in the program like they do. I wanted to know how they felt. And a lot of you reached out afterwards. Some of the Texas folks who watched the show and listened to the podcast, you reached out afterwards to voice your opinion. And it was about 80-20 in agreement with what I felt. But the 20%, just to kind of play devil's advocate, which I did on the show, I told you the 20% were saying, well, we can't wreck recruiting. If we were to get rid of Tom Herman, it would wreck recruiting. Well, then Quinn Ewers decommitted in the 2022 class. And that's just an absolute mess to have that happen. And so you started to see some bleeding in recruiting. This year's class is not lighting the world on fire. You've had, big legacy guys like the Brockermeyers leave the state. And so this was not going to be all that special a class either. So especially in light of the Ewers decommitment, I went back to them and I said, what now? I want to have a devil's advocate argument. So recruiting's bleeding. You certainly don't have any consistent elite product on the field or anything close to elite. What are you selling me on? All I want to do is I want someone to come up and I want you to tell me, what am I waiting on? Because I can understand someone saying you got to have patience. You got to give them some time. I'm okay with that as long as you can give me a vision of what is it I'm waiting on. What is it you have reason to believe is coming that just hasn't come quite yet, but you give it a little more time, the roots will take hold and you will eventually see a harvest. What are we waiting to see grow? And what signs, what indicators do you have that it'll be there? Because I look for it. This is the last show you'll come to and hear me calling for someone to be fired every week. That's not the kind of show we do. I just think Texas is so much better than they have been, and I don't think that they have the right elements in place right now to maximize that potential. So the game at Oklahoma State last week kind of deadened some of the outward criticism, but like I said, I get the sense from kind of just the feelers that I get from around that program. I don't think many people whose opinions are really going to matter on this were swayed all that much last week. Nor do I think a win or a loss Saturday, either way, changes anyone's opinion. I developed my opinion already, so what they do the rest of the year is irrelevant for me. I don't do the whole week-to-week change of opinion. I was doing one of the consultations that I've been doing with a lot of you guys who are interested in getting into this line of work. And last night, by the way, email me, joshpate706@gmail.com if you want to get in on one of those. Got a few slots open for next week. So someone asked me, how do you avoid doing that? How do you avoid being very knee-jerk and going on the air the day after a loss and saying, fire this man? And so I gave him the water-honey analogy, which I've used many times before. This is how you have to think as a rational person, or more importantly, as an athletic director. I had it explained to me one time by someone who was in a hiring and firing position. He said, the way you avoid the knee-jerk reaction is you put a drop of honey on one plate and you put a drop of water on another plate. And then you turn both the plates sideways and the water drips off immediately. The honey just start slowly creeping towards the ground, and gravity's working on it, but it's going to take a little while. He said, you got to be the honey. The fans, they can be the water because it's not their job. They can be emotional. It's not their job. You got to be the honey, because if you're the water, you change your mind every quarter and a half, and you end up digging your athletic department in such a hole with so many buyouts to simultaneously pay that you're never going to be successful. So I try and adopt that mentality as just a neutral observer. I've got my opinion of this current coaching staff. I don't think it's going to work out there, but here's the caveat I've always had, and here's the caveat I always will have. It's the reason I laugh at folks who criticize Malzahn at Auburn and call for him to be fired. I criticize it because of the following question. I always ask the same one. Who do you have that's going to be definitively better than the man currently in charge? No one's ever able to give me an answer at Auburn. Right now, there is an answer out there for Texas. The answer is Urban Meyer. Unlike some who have dismissed that as just, oh, that's a laughable notion, I believe that the smoke is legitimate. What I don't believe is anything's been decided. I talked with Urban Meyer for like 30 minutes a few months ago. We put the interview on the YouTube channel, actually. And I just suffice it to say, I said at the time, and I will reiterate it now, I don't believe that man's done coaching. I don't believe he believes he's done coaching. So I'll just say that. I've never talked to Urban Meyer about Texas, never for a second in my life. I'd love to. And, Coach, you can reach out. You got my number. But I'm just independent of that. I think they believe that that's a possibility. And if it is a possibility, and if they can actually get that done, you've got your definitive upgrade. So that's what we're watching with Texas. I don't know what in the world the result Saturday would have to do with anything, but that's what you got going on at Texas.